My guest today on Shredding the Gnar is none other than Chris Burkard. Chris, it is beyond rad to have you on STG. Thank you very much for making time.
Grateful to be here. Grateful to chat and catch up and see what you guys have cooking this year.
I want to jump straight in with this question. You got married really young. I mean, really young, early 20s. I mean, huge responsibility for such a young man. How did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's interesting when I've thought at times about just the people that I've worked with in my studio or in my career and stuff, and like thinking about, the sort of concerns, responsibilities that I've taken on at that age, knowing how it changes things, like it's very different to go to the end of the earth and look for a story or make a film or work on a project, knowing that at home you have real people who are relying upon you. It changes the dynamic. Sometimes it makes you push harder. Sometimes it makes you not want to push as hard because you're worried about, taking unnecessary risks. And I think that it's a dynamic that requires a lot of, there's no way to explain it to somebody, I feel so lucky that I found, the person that I care about at a young age. But it definitely, didn't make life easier in some way. It honestly made life some ways more challenging, but those challenges came with incredible rewards. And as you know full well, like such a tricky thing to balance, building a career and designing a life around travel when you do have somebody who, is your significant other and you want to support them in everything they're doing and raise kids. And I actually made a full-blown podcast with my wife talking about this exact subject because it was so meaningful to both of us. And I didn't want to speak for her. I wanted to kind of shine a light on her experience because I think we built and created this life together in many ways. And so I feel indebted to her for the support that she's given me and also just like the validation. One of the things that's so hard as a creative person is finding validation in the work that you're doing, finding that pat on the back, that you're doing the right thing. And so she really provided that for me at times in my life when I needed it. And I think that's made a huge difference for me.
And for me, like, how did you jump? I wouldn't say segue because that's a smooth transition, but how did you jump from being a mechanic to being the world's best photographer? I know there was a lot that happened in between, but initially, how did you jump from being a mechanic to a photographer?
Yeah, it was the byproduct of growing up in a tiny town. I wish I had this like romantic story for you that I was so I wanted to document nature and I wanted to save turtles and I wanted to do all these, altruistic things, but I just don't think that's real. I don't think that's honest. I feel like as a young kid, all I cared about was just seeing the world around me. I didn't grow up with a lot of travel experience. I had no idea how to travel the world, how to interact with other cultures. I felt I was very sheltered. And so I think that when I saw a camera, it was more about me seeing opportunity to then see the world. And I wanted to travel. And I was eager to do that. But yeah, I mean, I had a not a career, but I had an option in high school to like work as a mechanic. I had a full ride scholarship to a technical institute, and I was working at a shop, as you know, at a pretty good shop. It was like I was working on a restoration shop for Mercedes Gullwings because I was pretty good with my hands, and it was sick. I mean, it could have been a career path. I could have, been happy doing that, and it would have been rad. But I feel like I just wanted more, and I wanted something different, and I feel excited. I was excited about where the camera could take me. So my first intuition was like, well, if I pursued this and I played my cards right, maybe this could show me more than just my hometown. And so that was kind of, honestly, that was really my like connection to photography. And obviously the moment that I started to go see the world a little bit, I immediately became enraptured by the idea of documenting beautiful places and the creativity with it. I don't think I would have made it very far if I didn't have some creativity there. But I guess, to be honest, I don't think of myself as this really creative person. I think of myself as a really stubborn person and a really committed person. And at times that commitment has led me to kind of, be the one willing to kind of endure, right? I'm the person who's like willing to usually like stay out the latest when the Northern Lights might come out, or drive the furthest, or, subject myself to like, going on that trip with, terrible food and terrible plant, whatever it is. I feel like that's kind of been my strength, and it's paid off. And obviously I've gotten smarter and more intelligent, but I haven't taken like a really conventional path to what I wanted. And I think that that's because there wasn't really like a conventional path. There's not like a straight and narrow to figuring it out,
You're a firm believer in that statement that anything worth pursuing is gonna take sacrifice. And like, look, I completely agree here. You're not gonna achieve much in terms of like a passion-driven thing if you don't make a lot of sacrifices in life. Because a lot of people just look at your Instagram or your TikTok and your images and they go, oh, wow, Chris Burkard, 4 million followers, hit follow, amazing dude. But they don't understand the years, the decades of sacrifice in which it's taken to get to this point.
Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, of everything. I think that there's, for me, there's like a kernel of truth everybody has to offer the world. And I think that we all need to be sensitive to the fact that like all we can do is share our own experiences. So I can't speak for anybody else. And for me, I know that anything that I have pursued has required some element of suffering. And I appreciate that. I respect that. I love that. I mean, I, in fact, very much love the idea that passion is basically a part of my process, and passion requires, it doesn't just mean like, yeah, everything's joyous. It means that you're willing to kind of forego something or give up something or sacrifice something in order for something else. Right. And I think it's the difference between, living and existing. Right. And living, to live is to suffer. It's also to endure some hard things, as opposed to just trying to exist in this world.
We probably all know the answer to this one, but which country has impacted you the most in your life?
I mean, my own country, the US for sure. But I think that where we're going with this is like, which place have I experienced outside of my home that is, obviously changed me the most. And I would, I'd be lying if I didn't say Iceland, that, right? It's a place I've been many times. And, but I think it's more about what it represents. Like my inspiration that I've found there can be found a lot of places. It can be found in South Africa. It can be found a lot, but the key, there is a key to this. There is like a recipe. And to me, the recipe is that if you are in an environment that asks more of you. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think that when you are in the polar latitudes of the world, or the extremes, you are oftentimes in an environment where the landscape is more rugged. I don't know much about South Africa. I've sadly never been there, but I'm a really good perception. I can have a really good perception when it comes to images, and I can see that the coast is wild and rough, and there are beautiful cliffs that meet the ocean, and that like vertical relief, that ruggedness, it really comes through in the images. It comes through in a lot. And I think that I look for those types of places. I look for places where the weather and the landscape is something to be respected.
Yep.
And I think as you get closer to the equator, it becomes a little bit less of a concern. It becomes a little more stable. It becomes a little more, every day is going to be 80 degrees and whatever, and it's flatter too, oftentimes. So for me, I look for those harsher environments, and those harsher environments to me have been great teachers. And they've been great teachers because of the fact that when you go out with the intent of creating something or documenting something, you are subjecting yourself to the elements, and the elements can be great teachers. They can oftentimes force you to slow down, force you to be more patient, force you to kind of think about what you're doing, how you're shooting it. And also too, there's an element of value where I think that I place a lot of value on images that have deep and meaningful stories, like to me, personal stories. So when I see those photographs now, I connect to them. I relate to them. They mean something to me. They feel special. And I think that's kind of, one of the key elements of like a good image that I look for.
Here's an interesting one. We look at Instagram, we see these images of white sand beaches, beautiful blue skies, palm trees, so many people in Bali at the moment. Would you say it's easier to get that money shot in a tropical sort of climate environment than what it is in a hostile environment like Iceland, Greenland, northern Norway?
I would honestly, it's hard. I think it really comes down to this. I think that it's easier to get a unique photograph in a wild and remote environment, only because people haven't seen those places as much. So when you do see it, like if you see like a 2-foot wave, below a volcano in Alaska, you're like, oh my God, that's so cool. That to me. And I think that the general consensus is the same, because what we're really used to is a lot of the same stuff. Therefore, but it's also, it's a matter of being willing to be there. You have to first and foremost be willing to go there. And I think what that requires are people, anyone really who's willing to go to those environments. And I think being willing is like the key. That's the first thing. Right. And then if you're willing, then you will hopefully be in the planning stages. And that's a whole nother process, right? Of like, how do I get there? What do I bring? How do I prepare, et cetera, et cetera. So that's like another barrier. Right. And then I think through that entire process, you become more respectful of the environment, because you know how much it's asking of you, how much time and energy. And so I guess for me, I look at all those elements as being like, it's actually easier to get really interesting photos in these more unique remote places, but there are a few people willing to go there. Now, I think when it comes to just shooting, the experience of shooting in general, filming something, documenting, it's a lot easier when you have consistent weather. You are maybe in, the tropics or somewhere where it's a little more first world, right? You have an easier time shooting, but I don't think that the word interesting is necessarily what I would relate that to.
So here's a good question. Sacrifice. Who do you trust for honest feedback?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think, to be honest, not many people, because I think that in the beginning of my career, I developed like a really thick skin. And I say that only because I feel like when you start your career as, say, a surf photographer or a photographer working for the magazines, it kind of feels like you're just subjected to everybody's opinion the entire time. I mean, all you're ever doing is like putting your photographs in front of the editor or an editor somewhere, and then them telling you whether they like it or they don't or whatever. Right. Which is like really challenging. Right. And it gives you a thick skin. And so I think nowadays I've kind of tried to look back. I'm a big advocate of like looking back on one's choices or career and figuring out what you did right and what you did wrong. I think that's the only way I've ever been able to learn, to be honest. So that being said, I think that one thing I would just say is that I've looked back and realized, well, some of these opinions that I was seeking, this validation I mentioned my wife and the validation from that. Like, I'm like, that was bullshit. Like, I didn't need to have that person's validation. Maybe that got me published in the magazine. Maybe that got me access to whatever, or gave me a paycheck. But for me to sort of, like, I guess you could say, put the weight of my work and the quality of my work in their hands to then let it define who I was as a creative, I don't think that is something I value as much. And I wish I wouldn't have listened to as much back then. You know, people are really often eager to get feedback. And I'm the same way. Like, I loved getting feedback. I loved getting opinions, yada, yada, yada. But I think that it's something now that I'm very weary of. And I'm also very weary of giving, because I just feel like, it's a really dangerous game. And if you look for your heroes to give you feedback, or you look for an editor to give you feedback, I'm just very cautious of that. So I think it's important to realize, like, you need to find people you truly respect. You need to find people that know how to give good feedback. That's one other thing too, is that some people that you like, or you like their work, they're not a good critic. Doesn't make them a good critic, right?
True.
So that being said, this is sort of this is my word of the wise. Like, look for feedback in the right places. Understand what it is you're trying to get from that. If somebody comes to me looking for feedback from Chris, right, and all they really want is a pat on the back, like, that's not criticism. That's not feedback. They just want to kind of, receive that validation. So I try to be really conscious of if somebody needs just validation, or if they need actual criticism.
Wow.
So no, I do not.
That's a great answer, dude. It's a great answer.
Yeah, I don't give that all the time.
Your wife, Bree, her father, I understand, was a major influence in your career path. And I find that interesting because he influenced your career path in a large way. And yet now you spend a lot of time away from the family.
Yeah, I think that if anything, my relationship with my father-in-law was a good motivator for me, only because, when I asked him if I could marry his daughter, I was 19. I was nobody. I had no career. I had a couple images, published at this point, with the dreams of becoming someone or something, which was cool. And I loved that. But man, it was tough, like when somebody responds to you and tells you, like, well, how are you going to support them? How are you going to provide for them? Like, that's a hard pill to swallow, because he came from a much different, like, line of work, a much different thought, a much different way of living life, being that you went to college and you got this job, and then you pursued that for as long as you could. And job security is the most important thing. And I think that I just realized that I value different things, and I want to teach my family different things and experience different things. And although I respect and appreciate all the lessons that I did learn from him, it was not a tumultuous relationship at all, but just a challenging one. And I think that he served an incredible purpose in my life in motivating me and to make sure that I was a provider. I was a good provider, and somebody who, if all this didn't work out, I'd be working at the local, McDonald's to make ends meet for my wife, because that's the most important thing.
Exactly.
This is just the byproduct of being fortunate and really taking the right risks and things like that. But there's a season for everything. And I really took those risks at an early age. And I'm glad I did, because it would be harder to make them happen now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It always amazes me, you've got a community of almost 4 million people, and yet you always get back to me. I slide into your DMs and boom, you respond. You're amazing, dude. And you teach me two things about brand. One, it's about you as the person that ultimately drives your brand and how you engage with your community. And then it's your brand. And you need to work on both aspects of those brand. And to me, you're a person who understands the business end of social media.
I think it's funny because I think that people, I look at social media as like, I run a business, and this is, if I ran a business and I had a marketing department, this would be something that I would absolutely want to be investing in is time to spend connecting with people. And I think that the reality is I just have a different relationship with social media than other people. Like, yeah, it's a great tool and it allows me to share projects and promote products and all these things. But the truth of the matter is that when you boil it down, all it is a glorified texting app. That's it. It's just a connection platform for you to connect with people. And that is like all it is, like, so if you don't enjoy connecting with people, you're never going to find success. There's no algorithmic hack you're going to be able to tap into that's going to make up for the fact that just connecting with people, engaging with them is the key. And I don't really care if Instagram someday will just fizzle out and fade away. But the thing is like that mindset and my willingness to do that isn't predicated just upon social media. I often am doing events, slideshows, film screenings, going to festivals. Like I've been lucky enough to engage with my community or the people that care about my work for years, before social media was ever a thing. Before I even had an Instagram account, I was premiering films. And so I've always been interested in those people and the people that like my work or the people that want to engage in my work. And I've wanted to get to know them. And I think that out of just a curious mind, that's been something I've been intrigued by. So yeah, I mean, it's a different relationship for sure. Different perspective maybe than some.
Recently, your friend Harold, a Icelandic pilot, passed away. Close friend. You were clearly grieved and devastated by this. How did you personally manage to cope and get through this difficult period?
Through my own experience, I had a really close friend who's somebody that showed me some of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my entire life. Somebody who very much was like a father figure to me at times. And so it's been interesting that I think in the beginning, all you can do is feel grief, right? When someone passes away, especially when someone passes away in like a kind of a violent, way. He crashed his airplane and then tried to swim out of it in a frozen lake and ultimately froze to death. Like that's brutal. And so I think that when grieving or when in the grieving process, you go through the whole range of emotions.
Yeah.
And that's healthy. That's healthy. I appreciate everybody who gave me great advice, permission to do so. But at a certain point along the way, I started to think about it and I was like, why do I feel sad? I feel sad for a couple of reasons. And I'm a very analytical person, think through things and try to deal with them in the most reasonable way. And yeah, I still just burst out in tears at times. It's sad, but I thought about the fact that I'm sad because I won't be able to experience life with him. I'm sad that others won't be able to experience life with him. But then I think about what made that person so special. And I think about the fact that so many people that I either introduced to him or he met, through the internet or whatever, and he took them flying. He was able to spend with most people their favorite day they can remember, their best day traveling to Iceland, which could and has been for many their best day ever. Like in their life. So when I think about that, I'm like, holy cow, who really lived? He really lived. He did exactly what he wanted to do despite all odds. He basically gave up everything to buy that plane and to make that work and pursued his passions despite, a lot of things. And,
wow.
And I think about it, I'm like, that's a really powerful thing to consider that, so every day he was in his plane, he was sharing not only what he loved, but he was able to share it with somebody who was potentially having their favorite day they can remember. And I've tried to keep that in perspective. And I've also tried to keep in perspective that, I feel so lucky to have had a friend like that, to have been able to meet somebody like that. And, yeah, they showed me a lot of things. It's sad I won't be able to fly with them. Will flying ever be the same? Maybe not. I don't know. But if anything, I feel I've tried to take that grief and I've tried to change it over to gratitude. Like, had I known that I would only get this much time with him and that these are the things we would experience, would I have changed anything? No, of course not. Like, I would have taken every opportunity, even more. And that's just what it is, right? I've tried to change that grief for gratitude and just
amazing.
I think this perspective change has really helped. And I'm no, like, I don't have this figured out. I've just been lucky enough to maybe not lose a lot of significant people in my life because my family's still pretty young. So, that's
cool, wild. Man.
Okay, I'm excited about this question because it involves animals. Let's talk alpacas. You love alpacas. Why alpacas? I believe you raise them. You have a farm with alpacas. Interesting animal, right?
My wife, fully. To be honest, it's funny because I didn't really ever think oh man, I'm going to raise alpacas. That's my dream. I didn't grow up with animals at all because I grew up with my mom living in smaller apartments. And so, when my wife and I got together, she grew up with horses and had some stuff like that. And I was always no dogs, no cats, no whatever. I don't want the responsibility. But then we bought some acreage together. We bought a property and have a ranch, and not really a ranch, but it's kind of a ranch. And as a part of the city code where I live, you have to make sure that it gets weed abated, right? So all the weeds get cut down and everything like that. So it was out of necessity that we actually brought them to our property because we needed an animal to cut down the grass. Okay. We were like, oh, I don't just want to hire somebody to go and rip it down. Let's get something where we can harvest, the fiber. Again, we can, they're great with kids and they poop in one spot, which is super convenient. And they're just rad, lovable animals. And so they actually weed abate a huge, 2.5 acre section of our property, so that's really rad. And I think it just, it evolved into something more than this out of necessity. They evolved into pets,
How long would you say it takes for you to pack for one of your expeditions?
Shoot. It depends. Packing is an art form. And I feel like it's one of the art forms that I really love. As odd as that seems, half of an expedition for me is the preparation, right? So I feel like I could do a tutorial on it, but it's funny because I've had to do trips where someday, but I've had to do trips where I've gone from Iceland teaching a workshop to then Greenland for 8 days on a boat, then all the way to India for a month. So I'm bringing trips where it's wait, what? You brought this and that. I just did a trip where I went heli skiing in Iceland, and I was in Norway shooting surfing, cold water surfing. And then I went ski mountaineering in the Alps. And it was everything you could imagine. So I've really tried to understand to dial in my kit, and it can be anywhere from if I'm going on a one overnighter, I'll just pack in 20-30 minutes. I usually pack something to exercise in because I'll want to go to yoga class or go climbing or whatever. So I'll do a little research before I go, what city am I going to be in? What time am I going to arrive? I'm going to be going to Dallas next month. I've got some time before the event. Boom. And then and if it's a month-long trip, I'll usually start packing a month out. I want to be fully packed almost 10 days out. And then I want to repack those bags and make sure,
I also noticed you've been doing some really rad things with your kids during that, difficult 2-year period. How did it affect you as a family unit during that time?
It's been interesting because I hate to be it's been the hardest 2 years. It's actually been an incredible 2 years because I was able to work a lot stateside and I was able to kind of, be close to them. And they're at these ages where being with them and experiencing stuff with them is so important. They're 7 and 9, soon to be 8 and 10. So honestly, these were some of the best 2 years of my life, just because I feel like we drew closer as a family. And I think that it's been a process of just trying to understand more and more what they need and what they want. And I can definitely get wrapped up in work. That's the most important thing. I'm just going to go. But I've been trying to be more conscientious, avoid that, and just be more aware of like the fact that, okay, they're at these ages where I can start to really do stuff with them. And I want to do that. I want to take them up on that, right? Like spending time out in the wilderness, or, my oldest son, like, he's pretty capable. So that's really cool.
Chris, dude, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Shredding the Gnar. You're going to have to come and visit us in South Africa at some point if you haven't.
Psyched to go. Honestly, it's been on my list. Namibia has been on my list. Going down to South Africa has been on my list. Like it's beautiful. I have so many friends that spent time there. I feel like, not even to take photographs, but just to experience the place. It's, it's the end of the earth, right? In some ways, and I love that culture exists there. I'm a huge fan of the culture. So I think it's a necessity. It will happen. And if it does, I'd be stoked for you guys to help host a trip, or, we can experience some stuff, create something together. Like that's a dream.
Thank you very much. You've been watching #STG. Chris Burkard. What a rad dude.
I'm Chris Burkard, and I'm Shredding the Gnar.